Hey folks, Jeff Giles here from Toronto, Ontario. For my week 1 video assignment, I've chosen to focus on timbre. So here we go. Timbre deals with the quality of sound as opposed to its amplitude or its frequency, although those two things do come into play. Timbre is the sort of different colors that a sound has. It's the reason that a guitar and a harmonica sound different, even though they might be playing the same pitch. There are two main components to our experience of timbre. The first is what you could call the spectral envelope, and that has to do with fundamental frequency and overtones. So let's pull up a screenshot of the visualizing sound video from week 1, and you can see in the bottom left-hand corner that when Loudon was playing the sawtooth waveform, there's actually a bunch of different frequencies sounding at once, even though we heard one distinct tone. Now what we've got going on here is we've got the fundamental frequency, which is the lowest frequency that is sounding, and then we've got the overtones of that fundamental, which are all those higher frequencies that are sounding at lower amplitudes. Usually the fundamental frequency is the highest amplitude. Not always, but usually. So with those overtones, we have what are called harmonics and partials. Harmonics are whole number multiples of the fundamental. So if our fundamental was 1 Hertz, the harmonics would be 2 Hertz, 3 Hertz, 4 Hertz, 5 Hertz. The partials would be non-whole number multiples. So if we had a 1 Hertz fundamental, our partials would be, 2.794 Hertz, 3.2 Hertz, 7.1 Hertz. When the harmonics are more prominent, the sound is going to be more kind of tonal, more pleasing, something where your brain perceives it as being one pitch. When you have a lot of partials present at higher amplitudes, it's going to sound like noise, like a stack of papers falling over, where you can't necessarily discern a pitch. So that is those are the overtones, or the spectral envelope. And the time envelope is the sort of life cycle of the sound. When the sound goes, from the period in time when the sound arises from silence and then goes back into silence. There's 4 phases of that: attack, decay, sustain, and release. The time envelope can also be called the ADSR envelope. So I'm going to pull up another screenshot here, and you'll see that this is a zoomed out oscilloscope. It's a sort of a visualization of sound as transverse waves. And you can see that there's a dotted line that's been drawn on the top and the bottom, kind of following the arc of those waves. Anything that happens in between those two lines is what's called the time envelope. So the attack phase is when the sound goes from silence up to its loudest amplitude. The decay phase is when the sound goes from its loudest amplitude to its kind of resting level as it sounds. The sustain phase is when the sound is sustaining at a generally consistent amplitude. And the release phase is when the sound goes from its sustain level back down to silence. So that's the time envelope, and different sounds will have those different phases at different lengths of time, at varying amplitudes, and that's another way that we experience sounds as different from one another through timbre. Just a couple last things. Visualizing timbre, we can visualize timbre using the oscilloscope, the spectrum analyzer, or the sonogram. The oscilloscope will allow us to view the time envelope, but not the spectral envelope. The spectrum analyzer will allow us to view the spectral envelope, but not the time envelope. The sonogram will allow us to view both at the same time. And we can manipulate timbre using EQs to play with the spectral envelope, either amplifying or attenuating different overtones in the frequency range. And we can use dynamic effects like compression or gating to play around with the time envelope. So that's all I have to say about timbre. I'm almost out of time. 5 minutes. Thanks, guys.